So I recently went from knowing nothing about The Witcher, other than I guess the a new game came out a few years ago, Witcher 3. A lot of people seem to like it.
It was more than a
To
few years at this
being
point, I think.
Yeah, it's been a little bit now. To being a massive Witcher fan. And it all started one Thanksgiving. Actually, my girlfriend's cousin recommended that in the absence of Game of Thrones to watch, another high fantasy show to watch called The Witcher. I was like, oh yeah, that had a video game, didn't it? I guess there's
Yeah.
three of them. And I watched the show. We watched it together, and I loved it so much that I started reading the books that the show and the video games and everything is based on, the original books. And I'm currently halfway through the second anthology of stories. I'm deep into The Witcher right now, in particular. And so I
Mhm.
finally just started playing the first Witcher game, which I've tried and failed to like kind of start before because the controls, I really, really like playing those kinds of games on a controller. The first Witcher game was made for the PC with the PC in mind. And what I mean by that is that you cannot play it without mouse and keyboard. You
Yeah.
can map all of the controls to parts of the controller, but it will not work. You will be missing out on certain features of the game, or you will be missing out, or you would have to like go through the menus and then like add like, oh, I really need this sign for this thing, so I'm gonna add it to the D-pad or something, but then you won't be able to do this. You have to like redo that every single time, and you need the signs pretty often. It's made with mouse and keyboard. Even like with the menus and stuff, there's a cursor that you're moving around and clicking on things with. There's no
Mhm.
like button up and down. It's impossible to play with a controller. But
And when was the first like that game? When did that come out?
so it released in 2007, and it definitely shows its age. It honestly feels like it was released way before then.
Mhm.
With how archaic some of the controls are, and the fact that it literally does not support controllers, when the Xbox 360 controller was one of the most popular PC gaming controllers at the time.
I'm actually surprised they wouldn't try going that route.
Yeah. Well, with some of the features of the game, there's no way they could have done it. But I recently got the Steam Deck, which is amazing, by the way, anyways, and is very, very customizable when it comes to controller support. And one of the things that it has is trackpads, a left and a right trackpad,
Oh,
which
that's
was
cool. Yeah.
key to playing this game because I was able to map the each of the signs. I was able to assign the left trackpad to be a numpad, 1 through 9. Different parts of the trackpad are different numbers, just like a numpad. And so I was able to assign each of the signs numbers 1 through 9. And that's how I was able to use the magic, for example. And to get through the like menus and stuff, I was able to use the other trackpad as a mouse and keyboard. And then I kind of mapped the control stick as mouse controls. So I
That
didn't
sounds
have
very complicated.
it was a little complicated. I didn't have as fine control, and there were some things where it was like press F, and I was like, okay, well, I know that F is mapped to this thing, so I'll just press this instead. Or like you have to use Shift to do this. I'm like, oh, what did I bind Shift to again? There's a little bit of that, but I got used to the controls pretty quickly. But that was kind of interesting because that was my first like full gaming experience with the Steam Deck.
That was the first game you played with the Steam Deck, or
It wasn't the first game I played with the Steam Deck. The first game I replayed Portals 1 and 2. Just kind of,
of course. Of
start.
course.
Yeah, if I was going to play anything, it was going to be a Valve
Obligatory.
game. So,
Yeah.
And then there was a different Aperture game that they released. It's kind of like the tech demo for the Steam Deck. I played that one too. It's Aperture Hand Labs, I think. So I played through a few games before, but that was my first like full, I guess, because in a way Portal almost feels like two massive tech demos, like a massive like third person game on the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid of using mouse and keyboard. I like mouse and keyboard for certain games, but for over the shoulder third person games, I tend to prefer controller. And I actually ended up playing it on the Steam controller after a while because I got the dock. And so I docked the Steam Deck, and then I was just kind of playing it on the Steam controller. And a lot of people hate it on the Steam controller. I think it's pretty sweet.
My brother likes it. He played like this claw game with it where you pretend to be Spider-Man but in like a poly world sort of thing. It looked
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah, the Steam controller allows you to play games that you would normally only be able to play with mouse and keyboard. The Witcher is a great example of that. And you just rebind some of the parts, and then I basically set up my Steam controller very similar to how I have my Steam Deck, because it's also super customizable, and it works fine, perfectly fine. The Witcher was interesting because they were kind of inventing new story, because the books at that point had basically finished. There was the original anthologies and the 5 Witcher's Chronicles books, and the game takes place immediately after the 5th Witcher Chronicles book. There's this big battle that happened, this big war, and then Geralt dies, ? But then the beginning of the first game happens, and then he basically survives but lost all of his memories, which is a fantastic way to reintroduce the characters throughout the story for the people that are meeting them the first time, which was probably a lot of people.
Yeah. It's kind of cool that it's a game that actually is a continuation of a pre-established narrative from like a book, instead of just like, they could have easily just, redid a game based off the first book or something.
Yeah. And to be clear, they kind of did that too. A lot of the stories that happened in the anthologies, which is basically before he published the Chronicles, Sapkowski, I think I'm pronouncing that name right, was just kind of writing a series of short stories about this character named the Hexer, regarding kind of different high fantasy takes on Polish folklore, and the concept of different explorations of the concept, the human heart in conflict with the voice of reason in your head. And each of the stories, if you dissect it, all comes down to a different exploration of that concept.
Mm-hmm.
There are some characters where, because Geralt has a silver sword, which is poisonous to monsters. It does like extra damage to monsters, basically. And a steel sword for people, basically. And at the beginning of the stories, he says, this sword is for monsters and this sword is for people. But then towards the end of the narrative, people will like ask him, like, that sword is for monsters, right? What's that sword for? And he would say, other monsters. Like, he's very philosophical in a lot of ways in the books. And you kind of see that evolution, which is kind of frustrating in the video game, because this takes place after all of that, and he's kind of starting from square one again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of points where, like, you meet certain characters and he kind of has to relearn his morality that he just went through. But anyways,
it's a good way of soft rebooting him.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of soft rebooting him. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a character that Geralt meets because he fights monsters. He defeats monsters. That's sort of Geralt's whole deal. But then an old friend of Geralt meets him in the first game. And he's really surprised that Geralt survived and all of that, because he was supposed to be dead, which he was supposed to be in the books. But, they kind of soft retconned because it was kind of open-ended,
Yeah.
So, but then he asked him a question, like, say, he was kind of testing him almost. Like, if you met a vampire, but he was perfectly sane and he didn't kill people, and some vampires, they only really drink blood in the same way that you and I drink beer. They just do it for fun, not for substance. Like, what would you do in that case? And Geralt's like, I would kill a vampire because they're a monster. But then in the books, there's a character that Geralt realizes that questions his morality a little bit. Like, that's a sentient being, and vampires are evil, but this one is not doing evil, and he befriends him, and they like battle together and stuff, so he in a way is starting from scratch, but they do a decent job of reintroducing some of the characters and stuff. You actually meet that guy's wife in the game, so
that's like the vampire.
Yeah, you meet the vampire guy's wife and his daughters.
That's cool.
So there's a lot of links to the books, and in a way they're kind of like starting Geralt from scratch, but they're trying to catch him up to the lore from the books. It's really, really interesting.
And in a way, it also brings the player along to catch them up on the morality of the world.
Yeah, and the morality and the philosophical angle of Geralt.
Now, does the first game, I don't know to what degree you can manipulate the choices, but in the first game, can can you manipulate a lot of the choices? Because I've only played Witcher 3, but I do notice that in a lot of like the sub quests, you do have a lot of freedom to do, at least within what Geralt would theoretically do in situations. So like it's not like he's going to do something that Geralt wouldn't do, but you do have an influence on his morality, so to speak.
So I haven't played The Witcher 2 because I was kind of playing Shantae in the middle of that, and I knew Tears of the Kingdom was coming out, and I knew that I just did not have enough time to play Witcher 2 from beginning to end before Tears of the Kingdom came out. So, I really needed to just wait on that one.
Yeah.
But from what I understand is that a lot of the plot of The Witcher 1 is mostly ignored. There is some canon parts, like there's a character that can die in a certain battle in The Witcher 1 that appears in Witcher 2. So, canonically, he didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kid, Alvin, who is basically just a replacement for Sorella. And, Ciri is... I don't know why they decided to just not include Ciri, but they introduced for the first time this other character with Elder Blood, which is like ancient Elvish, lineage type stuff. And because of his lineage, because of his Elder Blood, he has certain magical powers, which is just Ciri.
Yeah.
So,
that sounds similar.
In the story, you can kind of pick who Alvin ends up with regarding you kind of pick who is his canon mom in a way, or his adoptive mother. You can pick between these two characters, Shani and Triss Marigold.
Oh yeah.
And
Triss is one of the love interests, right?
So is Shani. And so Shani doesn't appear in later games. She's honestly a random character from the third book. I don't know why they chose Shani instead of... Well, Triss is kind of a replacement for... They kind of merged Triss and Yennefer together for some reason in Triss. But anyways, so instead of having Yennefer, they chose Shani of all characters. Anyways. So Shani is one of the two love interests, and the one that you choose to look after Alvin is basically your canon waifu.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's some weird time travel type shenanigans, and the final boss might have been Alvin in a complicated way. So I don't know.
Whenever time travel is introduced, it almost is never good. Almost.
Yeah, they handled it okay if they did what I think that they did. But I don't know. They kind of leave it open ended, but I'm pretty sure they were heavily hinting towards that was the case. But in any event, so basically you choose which character Alvin ends up with, and that character is your waifu for laifu, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I chose for him to go with Triss, and from what I understand, he's not in the second game. So
you chose wrong.
I think that. But then Triss is an actual love interest in the second game. So I don't...
She's around in the third game too.
Yeah, she continues. Triss is a pretty important character.
Yeah, she sticks around.
She's an important character in the books too. So I don't know what they were going for there. I think that they just kind of screwed up. They screwed up a few of the characters, honestly. But
I thought that the decision-making stuff of those games were more resemblant of Mass Effect, but I don't know. Hearing you sounds like it's a different story.
It's like they kind of had a canon ending in a way, but then it kind of was okay, kind of hand waved away. Okay, well, clearly something happened with Alvin because he ended up turning into a bad guy later in life anyways. So, something happened with him and he's just not in the second game, and they never mentioned him apparently. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I haven't played the second game yet. Maybe they handle it a little bit more elegantly. But I think that there's kind of in some ways a canon ending, and in some ways don't worry about it.
I thought I've seen reviews and whatnot and people talking about those games, and I thought the consensus was that the first two games were actually kind of well, specifically the first one, but it was kind of confusing, and people had mixed feelings for those games.
Especially the first game, yeah. The first game is a big mixed bag.
And that's kind of interesting because it was able to actually spawn off until eventually it hit big with 3.
Yeah.
And that's normally trilogies don't go that route. Normally trilogies go the first game's great, and then it just kind of dies off by the third.
Yeah.
But I guess Witcher defied the odds there, and the confusion I'll say the confusion in the first game sounds like the confusion that I had in the first season of Witcher.
So you watched the show?
Yeah, I have seen the show. I thought the first season was confusing. It wasn't until like way later that they actually tell me that like 3 timelines are going on, and I'm like, oh.
So,
and I didn't know what was important and what was just a filler episode. So like when the porcupine dude showed up, I'm just like, this is like a filler episode, right? And I'm like, no, this is actually extremely important. And I'm like,
yeah.
I straight up like this whole like nobody taught me what gift of surprise is or whatnot. The law of surprise. Yeah. So like they just like casually throw that out and made it a big deal as though I'm supposed to know. And I'm like, I don't. What? Like you just get that person's daughter? Like what? Huh?
So the idea,
why is that important?
From
I know what it is, but
okay,
now, but
yeah, he doesn't just get that person's daughter. Ciri is his daughter.
Yeah,
magically,
it's like
kind of.
It's like the next surprise in that person's life belongs to him, right? Like, and it's like magically binded. Like that's like a contract essentially.
It also kind of magically creates that surprise in a way, because if you remember, she was just automatically pregnant.
Yeah.
Whereas she wasn't before. In the books, that kind of is handled a little bit differently. It's implied that Geralt knew that was going to be the case, and he totally knows that she had a daughter in the books.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that he kind of chose her to have a daughter in some kind of magical way because of the law of surprise.
Well, in the show, it had me confused. Because it just sounds like he just passively just says like, "Oh, I don't know, give me law of surprise," and then everyone's just like, "Oh crap!" And then like and I'm just like, "What just happened?" He's all confused too. Like everyone's confused, and everyone's just like, "Oh, how dare you?" And I'm like, "I don't know what he did."
Yeah,
I didn't realize this episode was so important.
It is a super important episode. That event basically has ripples throughout the entire Witcher saga. All of the Witcher Chronicles. Yeah, that was like
episode 4.
A random filler episode.
It was like a random filler episode that I didn't realize was so important in the middle of the show. And I'm like, what? I actually had the most fun with the show when it wasn't about the main story and it was just about Geralt talking about a monster that he's about to kill and how to kill it.
Yeah. Yeah, the show is, most of it at least, is based on some of the stories from the anthologies, which are basically just individual little short stories that Sapkowski wrote for like different contests. Some of them are like contest pieces, and then some of them were he submitted them to friends' high fantasy anthologies and stuff. And then he eventually had the idea, you know what, I'm gonna compile these 7 stories or so into a like book. I'm just gonna release it, and then kind of tie some interlude story in between where he's basically just having sex with this like water nymph, but not a water nymph. It's weird. So like in between each chapter, is kind of there's this like common thread between the stories, and then the second book comes out because he wrote more short stories about the Hexer, and then he compiled those into the second anthology, which technically takes place. Most of them take place before, but anyways, those short stories are kind of different side quests, kind of that Geralt goes on, and they take place kind of anywhere throughout the timeline. And the show took a lot of liberties with the order of events. And to answer some of your confusion, it's not that there's multiple timelines going on. There's only one timeline, but that Geralt has influence over the timeline.
Yeah, it's like it's telling like 3 different stories, but it's like all different timelines. But like it's all
different time periods.
Yeah, it's not timeline. Sorry, it's like different time periods. But like the show didn't really tell me, and like it wasn't even a grand reveal. It was just more like each episode that went by, there was some aspect of like, oh, you should already know this sort of thing, because they don't explain anything to me. Mm-hmm. Like if you didn't already know about the world, there are some things that they're just not going to actually address with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way that I don't know, I had a lot of complaints with the show actually. I loved the show. But having read the books, I feel I have a lot of complaints with the way that the show handled some things. I actually kind of like some of the way that they reinterpreted some of the stories, actually, even more than the books. You know, it's a love-hate relationship with the show.
I just wish I understood what was happening some of the time, because I'm like, I feel like this would be more impactful if like you just name drop a bunch of countries, but like you don't really, like the show doesn't tell me exactly where everything's happening, or like you don't know who the power players are until they're like already right in front of you, and
Yeah.
it feels like it needed a couple extra episodes of like cluing me in on the world so that I can understand like, oh, okay, here's the chess pieces, instead of like, I'm
Tie
on
some
this
of the story
chessboard.
together a little bit.
Yeah, I'm on this chessboard. I have no idea where the pieces are, and I have no idea how they move.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it, yeah. And you don't even know which part of the chessboard you're on half the
No,
time.
and there's 3 different chessboards. They're all playing different games,
And
but
different
yet they're all on the
yeah.
same. Yeah, yep, they're all in the same room.
Yeah,
And I'm like, it's so weird.
it's a little confusing. I'll grant that, but I feel like it was almost. I don't know who the show was made for, because it's clearly a lot of the people were jumping off of The Witcher 3, and a lot
Yes,
of the.
clearly.
It's definitely part of the show takes place during The Witcher 3, or during the Witcher video games in general. Like, oh, this event is happening. Like that happened in the video games, or
The
this,
Wild Hunt is here.
yeah, like this is a reference from something that's happening. It kind of takes place during the games, but it is the book versions of the characters, because like Geralt, for example, like doesn't have a beard, just like he shouldn't in the Witcher games. But then, I don't know. There's certain things that, like, it's clearly like the book version of the world, and there's a lot of stories that happened in the books that are being retold in the show. But then again, there's a lot of stories in the books that are retold during the first game, so I don't know. But I think it's kind of confusing the way that the story in world is handled, because it's almost for the book fans.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I feel like I'm going into this show and it expects me to know stuff, even though I don't.
Yeah.
Like, it just expects me to know things, and I'm like, dude, I don't know what's going on. I need some help. Clue me in.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's like I'm part. It's like it's a fan club, and I'm just not invited. I'm not part of it.
Yeah, like you're jumping into this fandom with zero knowledge.
It's still fun. Don't get me wrong. The most fun I ever had, like watching that, was just when they actually when Geralt actually sat down to explain to somebody a monster, what it does, what he's gonna do with it, why this works, and
Yeah.
like this is the most. It's the best part about The Witcher, is when they're actually explaining to me the world, because I'm interested in the world. You just need to explain it to me.
There are some things where if you played the games, then maybe you would gain a little bit more from the show. So like
There were some things that I picked up on because I played the game, but but I also knew, like, if I hadn't played the game, there was no way I was going to know this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that some of those issues with the story, I don't want to get too theoretical about the show. We've been talking about the show a lot, but the reason why Henry Cavill is leaving the show, because he's also a massive Witcher fan. He's read all the books. He's played all of the games.
He's a big nerd, yeah.
He's a massive nerd in general. But he's played through The Witcher 3 1,000 times, like 3 times at least. So like, he's big into the Witcher fandom, the Witcher lore. And apparently he was super annoying on set, because he would always be
correcting people.
Yeah, he would be like, he keeps saying like, this character really wouldn't do this, or this character doesn't know this, so they really wouldn't be behaving in this way. Like, he was apparently just the massive nerd of the group, always like kind of shouting about the inaccuracies and stuff, and he was really pushing for the more philosophical side of Geralt, which, to be fair, is difficult to portray in something like a TV show, and is really easy to convey in a book, because you can have the character's thoughts in the book. You can read through them. And Geralt is kind of more of a self-insert type character. You're supposed to be living through Geralt vicariously in a way. And it's hard to do that in a TV show where he's just kind of a cool guy cutting dudes and cutting monsters, You can't have that philosophical angle as well. So I understand where the show is coming from, but I also understand Cavill's side, where he wants it to be super accurate to the books, and
to the source material that he loves so much.
Yeah, and you know what? To be fair, I like some of the stories that the TV show told more, like the whole sequence where he visits that one guy's house who's like a monster.
Yeah,
that was so much better than what happened in the books. that was so cool the way that they did that in the show. The books was not like that. It was pretty boring. It was cool and fascinating. The guy was like touching like a silver plates and stuff, and that's how Geralt knew that he was a human. And there are some parts to it that were kind of interesting, but man, the show was so cool. The show version of that one, Ciri was there, and Ciri's she was not there in the book. And Ciri's relationship with the vampire girl like was really interesting, and I don't know.
We can gush over this for a while.
Yeah, man, I could keep talking about The Witcher, but anyways, I really enjoyed the game, and it gave me a deeper appreciation of some of the stuff from the books. Like it gave me a deeper appreciation of stuff from the books and from the show, because some of the events of the show are retold too. Like I think the first episode, actually, Geralt fighting the Striga, he's hiding inside the coffin and all that. Like that character, that princess, shows up in the first game. Like you see what became of her afterwards, and her like what being a Striga did to her, because she had to like learn how to be a human from scratch, basically. Like it was kind of interesting and to see that character in the game, and to see kind of some of the events that happened in the books in the game referenced in the game, or some of the consequences of them in the game kind of retold. And it recontextualizes a lot of what I saw on the show too, because the show was playing fast and loose with which events played where, like ended up where, because sometimes there's months that pass in between episodes, sometimes there's clearly years that pass in between episodes, and
that confused the crap out of me, because it doesn't really tell me.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
You have to like you have to just know to pick up the clues and not just think like, oh, it's right after the last episode. How am I supposed to know this happened 2 years ago? You didn't even tell me that.
Yeah. And the game, I really enjoyed how it recontextualized some of the stories that I saw from the show as well, that they were kind of inventing. So yeah, I greatly enjoyed the game. It was a little difficult to get into at first, and they kind of butchered some of the characters. Dandelion / Jaskier, they destroyed that character, man. But I still quite enjoyed the game. It was a really unique take on the Witcher lore that I've just now started getting into, and I can't wait to play the rest of the games, The Witcher 2 and especially The Witcher 3. And I'm starting to get into the Witcher Chronicles books now, which is a whole other thing. There's a lot to this world, and I'm a growing fan.
That's a very good series to get into.
Oh man, is it?